Welcome back to Gaffers Salon. Today we've got Jon Bregel, who is the founder of a community group called Variable. And I thought I'd just dive in, let Jon sort of describe what Variable is, how it's working, what he's been up to.
Awesome. Thanks, John, for having me. What is variable? Variable, I guess the kind of like tagline, easiest way to describe it is a community where filmmakers prioritize wellness and growth. And that's essentially essentially what it is.
Well, I know you have, so you have it's kind of like a social media platform like Discord or whatever. It's an app. You open it up or you go on the web on your computer. So you have this forum, then you have in-person meetings. You also have a podcast.
Right.
Um, Maybe why don't we start talking about like how are you structuring the in-person meetings? Like I know you have hookups in LA and in New York City. Are they around a particular subject matter or theme, or they're just general meet and greets, or how is that working?
Yeah, the meetups in LA and New York, we've been doing them monthly now for, gosh, a little over a year actually. And I have a couple good friends in LA and New York that lead them, which essentially just means they're there every month and they kind of welcome people. And it's really just a hangout. It's an opportunity for people that are interested or engaged in wellness practices, whether that's like physical health, mental health, emotional health, like therapy, things like this. People that are just trying to like better themselves in their relationship to film. And so that's kind of like the shared value that everyone shows up with. So every month there's anywhere from like, I would say 20 to like 70 people show up, and it's just a hangout. We call it like the no agenda hangout because you just show up and get to know people, and it's simple and sustainable. I think that's pretty much why we're doing it that way.
So Variable was built essentially as for filmmakers, right? You could
Yeah.
be a scripty, you could be a grip, you could be a DP, whatever, right? So it's basically people that understand working 14 or 16 hours a day, or juggling. We were talking earlier, and I was saying how interesting it was for me during the pandemic, or specifically the lockdown, and how it gave so many of us really just started questioning work-life balances. And certainly I think wellness was really a part of that, because we were in the midst of COVID. And the ICLS formed the International Cinema Lighting Society. Mike Bauman and Rafi Sanchez and Martin Smith, that came out of the pandemic. And I know I started Gaffers Salon also in that period of time, just looking to build community, looking to sort of engage with our friends and colleagues. And so where do you, I guess it might be interesting to dive into your backstory, because you had a very big production company. You were making a lot of money. You had a ton of clients. And then at one point you were like, wait a sec, and you had this pretty significant gut check and you walked away from it. And I think that's an interesting backstory. And that sort of led you into this journey of wellness and life work balance. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, for sure. So gosh, I think I'm 35 I'm 35 now, and I was 22 when a couple friends and I started Variable, which was a production company, and it kind of blew up overnight. It was we did a few personal projects, and this was in like the Vimeo heyday, and they got staff picks, and then those got a lot of views, and then commercial clients just started hitting us up when we were just like a little shell of a production company. Basically, we didn't have any staff, we didn't know how to do commercial productions, and then all of a sudden we're getting hit up to bid. We didn't even know what a bid was, really. We didn't know what a triple bid or agency, how that whole thing works. So we just kind of rolled with the punches for a long time. I think it was about 8 years or so, and it was all exciting and fun because we were learning so much, getting to bring all of our friends into the business and help them with their careers. And so it was really gratifying in a lot of ways outside of just the filmmaking. But the reality was that, like, for me, my whole life just became my work. It was all about work. All my friends were filmmakers. My whole life was just like in a film bubble. And that bubble basically popped for me about 8 years into the company when I was just continually burning out. I was continually getting depressed, and it got worse and worse. And then I guess my saving grace was I was shooting a commercial in China, and that's where I met my wife at the time. And when we connected over there, it was just sort of like this aha moment where I was like, okay, this person's really special. I don't want to screw this up, because I'd seen myself do that, kind of like not countless times, but plenty of times in my early 20s. And so when I went back to New York City, we were just moving into our new office in Dumbo. It was kind of like a dream space that we all agreed was what we wanted to do. And I walked in the office, and I had sort of this like out of body experience where I was like, whoa, like it was a physical reaction, spiritual, I would say. And I was like, I got to get out of here ASAP, or else like this relationship just, it's not going to work. I know how this industry goes. And like, she lived in China and I was in New York. And again, I was already like burned out to begin with. But so this was just like a big awakening for me. And so I left, and pretty quickly, it was within like 2 weeks, and began this journey of self-discovery. I'd say it was like a kind of like a spiritual awakening of sorts. It was an identity crisis. It was all these things. And so that's been, I think, about 5 years now. But the first 3 years out of that company, I feel like it was like I was crawling out of a jar of molasses, kind of like every day was like a slog. It's like, yeah, I was dating this person, and I was just trying to figure out who I was, like trying to figure out who I was outside of just a filmmaker. I was also taking like stimulant medications through my 20s for ADHD, and I had stopped taking them cold turkey about the time I left the business. So there was this other like mental side outside of what I was going through. I just need to say, I would never recommend doing that to anybody that's taking stimulant medications. Don't stop taking them cold turkey. So yeah, it was just like, it was a wild, like, I want to say like 3 to 4 years. And now it's like 5 years past. And I feel like I'm like getting grounded, and like so much of it's had to do with community, and just connecting with people, and being vulnerable, and people being vulnerable, and us all kind of understanding that like this industry is really hard, and we kind of need each other. We need to support each other and hold each other accountable, because it's so easy to backslide, because it's what we do is so awesome. That's how I see it. So exciting and so fun, that it's easy to just backslide. And like, so anyway, that's kind of my long answer to your question. Is that helpful?
Yeah, it's interesting because, also during lockdown, or maybe it was shortly after, I started, thinking a little bit about wellness. And I think truthfully, I don't think I've really started my wellness journey other than maybe in terms of my relationship. I mean, my wife is a huge workshop junkie. She's a big Mama Gina person. She is, always holding me accountable within our relationship, which is awesome. And so I remember I read Atomic Habits by James Clear, which was, a big New York Times bestseller book, blah, 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 but terrific book, really. If I boiled it down to one little line that stuck with me was this idea of, I think he called it the aggregation of marginalized gain, basically meaning if you could improve like 1% a day, 1% a job, or one, if you could just find these little, gains, you could really make at the end of the year sizable improvements. Or to your point, it's easy to start sliding backwards. You start phoning it in, because we, how it is, we get burnt out. I mean, the demands of what we do are tricky. I'm now entering into my 60s. My business partner's 72. He's still gaffing. Now, granted, he's not doing the big jobs or anything like that, but you can go along, you could have a very long career in this business if you wanted, even as a gaffer, or, in electric or grip or whatever. So this issue, as I enter my 60s, this issue of wellness is certainly front and center. And that might even be an interesting subcategory of variable is, 50 plus people dealing with, the things that we deal with, as we start falling apart. But so where do you, in terms of variable, what's your aspiration, or where do you feel you'd like to see this go in the next few years or 5 years from now?
I don't really know, to be honest.
Yeah.
I think it's very much been an experiment. Initially, it was like, I want to put this up and see if anyone relates to this or resonates with this.
Yeah.
And so far, I've just been getting a lot of affirmations generally from people. And I think as long as that continues and people are getting value out of it,
Yeah.
I would love to keep it going. I guess the challenge is I'm also a filmmaker too. And so I know I really want to keep it sustainable because I experienced the result of like such intense ambition in my 20s, and it ultimately collapsed. So I'm trying to just stay slow and steady with it pretty much, and just see what happens. And honestly, like, it's just been cool, like the types of people that have been reaching out, like yourself and other organizations and other companies that are just interested in the conversation. So I think just kind of going one foot in front of the other. So.
Yeah. I mean, it just seems like such a super relevant topic right now, and I think this, this issue of vulnerability, this openness to discuss these issues. I mean, we've all kept them buried. I forget where I was listening to you speak, or there was a conversation about how we just, you can't show weakness, you gotta, and so I think dealing, it was interesting when just before we started recording, you were talking about, and I think this is part of what I've continually been searching for, is what do we really want to do in the business? Like we have choices. Yeah, we got to pay the bills, we got to make the money, but I could do indies, I could do docs, I can do commercials, and you were just talking about sort of finding like, hey, I really love docs, docs really. And I remember talking with Tom Hurwitz, ASC, he and a group, Wolfgang Held, they formed that company, Camera Collective, with the intention, and he sort of stepped away from doing features, and they all just decided, hey, we really love these socially relevant docs, these documentaries. And so I forget how many, there are 5 or 6 of them now over there at Camera Collective, and they formed this company with that express purpose. And, they've just done an amazing, Claudia Rausch. I've worked with all these guys over the years, and I'm just like, well, that really is interesting to me, because like we were talking, docs for me have always been kind of my favorite, thing to do. I'm very, I don't get as many gear rentals, and, it's not as, maybe glamorous, but, at this stage of my career, I'm more interested in, the content, the really, sure, I love to do creative stuff, even in an interview setup, but I think, this is all about prioritizing not only the work-life balance, but the balance within work, right? The balance, like, what, do I really want to do this corporate stuff? Fuck no, I really do not want to do it. I'll take the job, I'll make the money, but if I can get a doc, I'd much, much rather do that.
Yeah. I feel like it's a hard pivot coming from commercials. I think that's what we were talking about a little bit before. It's like commercials are so lucrative, but it was easy for me to get really trapped in that, in like, oh, I can make X amount of money a day, and pay my whole lifestyle for like 2 days of work for a month.
Yeah.
I'm reaching the point where I'm grateful, to have those opportunities, but I'm also like, okay, it's time to really switch gears here and like follow my heart within the industry, which again, it's been a really, really hard. I think I'm like pretty in tune with myself, and even still, it's the money trap.
Yeah,
it's been a bear, man.
Yeah, it's like they used to call it the golden handcuffs or something, like, and I remember, speaking of I remember at a certain point, I had a couple of clients that were just miserable people, horrible people. I hated working for them, but they were super lucrative jobs.
Mhm.
And I would, every time the job came, I'd be bitching the whole job. I'd come home, and my wife at one point just said, why don't you just stop working for them?
Mhm.
And it didn't occur to me because I was like, oh man, the money was so, and it was like blood money, right? It was like, it
Yeah.
just really felt like blood money. And at one point, I'm like, you know what? I'm looking over my list of clients, and there are one or two that were just like horrible. And I just was like, I stopped taking the calls. I was always busy when they called. I said, no, thank you. And it was like the best decision I ever made. And then that translated into also how I hired people. I mean, there's so many great grips and electrics. And the truth is, most people I work with have been fantastic. But,
Mhm.
when you get somebody in there that's got attitude and blah, blah, it's like life's too short, right? And so I really started trying to make those choices relative to not only who I was hiring, but also who I was saying, yeah, the clients I was starting or continually saying yes to. Because there's so many good clients. There really are. I mean, I don't, now that I'm thinking over the last year or two, there are very, very few, bad clients. So cutting them out as soon as possible has been truthfully one of the best things I ever did.
It's hard to do. It
Yeah.
takes so much courage. I mean, what was that process like for you? Just like well, I guess you said your wife kind of helped support the idea, right?
Yeah. I think, it was lucrative, but well, I won't go into all the details, but at a certain point, it just became clear that it wasn't whatever amount I was getting on the job wasn't worth it. I was just so miserable doing it. And so it was really kind of a wellness decision, both for my mental health and even physically, maybe not so much financially. But what I discovered is, once I let one or two of those clients go, there were other clients that popped up, right? I mean,
Yeah.
yes, we're in kind of a general slowdown right now, but and this is going back 4 or 5 years. But there were other clients that popped up, and there were more jobs that came in, and maybe they weren't quite as lucrative or whatever, but it just wasn't. At a certain point, money. And I've talked about this on Salon a bit. It's like when I set my company up, making money was not at the top of the list. It was there, but it was down. Like I wanted to support DPs. A lot of times I bring extra shit to the project just because I can, because I personally want to have those creative options when we get there on the day. And I want to, serve the DP the best way I can. So it's much more about the creativity, the collaboration between my team, the DP, ultimately the director. And I just figure the money's going to pretty much work itself out. Some jobs I'll make a little less, some jobs I'll make more. For me, money was always not a top priority.
Mm.
So I don't know. I don't know if that helped or not helped, but I feel like as an owner op, I think it's sort of one of those value added things. Like clients know I'm going to show up with extra stuff. I mean, you can't make a big habit of it. Suddenly people start expecting everything for, free. But as the project gets more and more interesting to me personally, I become more and more willing to, go the extra mile. And, because why do it if we're not trying to do our best work, right? I mean,
Right.
what's the point? I mean, and I did a little salon thing where I was talking about that because, if you've been doing it as long as I have, I started in the 90s. I go through like sort of what you did. You kind of burn out. You suddenly realize, oh, maybe not in the way you did it in a different way, but I realized I'm just phoning it in.
Mhm.
I'm like, my creativity's gone. I don't seem to care anymore. And, I really had to take a step back and reinvent myself. And part of doing Gaffers Salon was during one of those periods where I felt like, man, I gotta get connected to community. I gotta get more inspiration. I just felt like something had happened, something had snapped. I was, clearly I was depressed, and it was because I wasn't, the creative energy, the creative juices weren't flowing. It was just like going from one industrial to the next. They were all kind of the same thing. And then once I started thinking, oh, let me really stay more on top of new technology, get really focused on having this arsenal of options, let me test things out on my own. When I started that, then suddenly it's like, oh, we're back into that creative energy flow,
Yeah.
that's just so important. Because once that goes, you're just like, they could hire any gaffer. Why are you hiring me? It's like, I got to bring, something to the party, and doing that, I think that makes me want to get up and go to work, you know?
Well, I hear you, man.
Yeah. Um, so the one thing I wanted to talk about is on variable, as I've been sort of going through the app, and you sort of break it down. I mean, I think it's interesting that you incorporate spirituality, whatever that might be, to whoever. I think that's so important. Do you have I just want to dig in maybe a little deeper to how you're thinking about wellness, and how in terms of this variable community, and maybe even relevant to how you've been coaching people. Where do you think people, I mean, maybe somebody's listening to this and they're, thinking, yeah, I really got to start thinking about wellness. I really got to think about mental health. I really got to think about these things. How are you? I don't know. I'm not sure what my question is. I guess it's sort of about what you see how you're seeing what falls under this large banner of wellness, and what you're, I notice you have like a spirituality forum. You've got, what is it, AHD, you've got different sort of maybe mental health things going on, the work-life balance thing. I don't know. Does that question make sense? I'm just trying to figure out how you're thinking about wellness in the larger picture, maybe.
Yeah, for sure. I think I'm not aware of like any kind of singular definition of wellness. I know that it's a practice as opposed to a goal. And I think there are maybe 10 or 11 different quadrants that fall within wellness as I understand it. There's, physical health, there's mental health, there's emotional well-being, social well-being, spiritual, intellectual, occupational, social. There's like a couple more as well. But the ones that I'm most honing in on or most interested in are physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual.
Mm-hmm.
And those are the ones that I have played the biggest role in my life. I mean, I'm not like a therapist or like a wellness counselor by any means. So like I really, whenever these questions come up about like what is wellness and et cetera, to me, it's a practice. It's daily things that you're involved in to try and better yourself and ultimately just feel better about yourself and who you are, and in relationship with others as well.
What do you see? I mean, you've been sort of around a lot of people that are joining the community. You've been doing the coaching stuff. What are you seeing as, is there some overriding problem you're seeing people dealing with, or is it just a huge variety of stuff? I mean, imagining burnout's got to be up there. That life work balance, that sort of thing. I mean, is there some common thread you're seeing running through, over the last year or two? Or
The one that immediately comes to mind is identity. This idea that I am more than a filmmaker, but I don't know who that is and I don't know what that is. I see, and I've had a lot of conversations with people that are in this state of what they consider like an existential crisis or like an identity crisis. And I think a lot of that has compounded as a result of the slowdowns, the strikes, COVID. It's, we find ourselves in this space when we're not working, and this big question mark comes up, and this feeling of, self-worth is the other phrase or word that comes up. It's, when I'm not working, I am worthless. And that, to me, it happens to me, all the time, but it's something to be aware of, that we are worth a lot more than our work, and how we find that worth in our life comes down to community, relationships, values, all these things that are present within work, but also so much alive outside of work. So and the reason why this all resonates so much with me is because that was my life in my 20s. Like I was just my work. And so when I left it, I was like, holy cow, like this is a force And it took me a lot of time and energy to kind of get to a point where I'm like, okay, I'm pretty comfortable in my own skin, like when I'm not working, and I'm grateful for that experience. But to your question, yeah, I'd say it's questions surrounding self-worth, identity, purpose, meaning, and
Yeah.
yeah.
It's interesting. I was saying to you earlier, I gone on vacation last week of September, and I came back and I think I worked one day in the first 2 weeks of this month of October. And at one point my wife said to me, are you depressed? You seem off. And I realized, shit, yeah, I'm like completely, like, the phone not ringing, me not working is like, was really, I hadn't really considered it. It was really taking a toll on me. Now I was trying to fill it with going to the shop, getting stuff done, doing things, of course, but I'm like, yeah, that's like really, especially for me, I've been doing this a long time now. And so I'm used to the slow periods and the ebbs and flows of the business. But I also realize I'm feeling like I'm in this somewhat unprecedented period where I'm talking to Andrew Locke in Australia, or Luke Servald in San Francisco, or Jacob Ballinger in Austria, and everyone's saying the same thing. They are pretty slow. And I used to be, for year after year, the only thing I could count on in the business was the run from the beginning of September to Thanksgiving would be gangbusters. It never failed. Every year, consistently. Every other month could be, up or down, any which way. But that run was always consistent until a year ago. And then like last year, that run was way off. This year, now, like I said, I've been sitting here for 2 weeks. So it's sort of like, wow, I don't know, what's going on. And then coupled with, the few years of inflation and, this sort of push down on rates and this constant rate struggle, at least in the non-union world, like every job is a negotiation, right? And trying to keep the rates up in lieu of inflation. I just had a conversation with a client yesterday who came to me with this abysmal rate. And I'm like, hey guys, and it was a commercial for a fragrance. It was like pretty high end commercial. And they came to me with these really low rates. And I'm like, so I'm still negotiating that. But it's, I do find, it's very easy to fall into depression if the phone doesn't ring for a week or two. So, yeah, it's, I've been trying to find, productive use of my time, and I don't even think I don't know if it's, I think it does dive into that issue of self-identity. But I always felt like work wasn't my number one priority. My relationship was my number one priority. Other things in my life came before work. So I don't know. It's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great to hear your thoughts about the relationship. I feel like it's like an intention that I think, so many of us have, but it's also I find it's so easy to like get our identity from working so much and providing, like being the providers. I don't know if you feel that way like as a man. I don't know if it's a gender thing, but that's how I've kind of associated it growing up, just seeing my dad being the one like working hard all the time because my mom was like a stay-at-home mom.
Yeah.
So it's like when I work my ass off, I'm like, and it's damaging my marriage because I'm not present and I'm in this like mission mode. Yeah. I'm like, well, I'm providing for us, and my wife, I don't really care, like you don't have to work that much.
Yeah.
And I'm like, damn it,
Well, I had the opposite that, it's interesting to talk about that is that when I met my wife, she was, struggling indie filmmaker. She was teaching acting, to help pay the bills. I was probably making a little, I was definitely making more than her at that period. And then, we were sitting around she'd struggled for a decade to get into television directing, just couldn't get an agent, couldn't get anything, even though she had made 4 feature films. And we were sitting around on a Friday and the phone rang and it was Ava DuVernay, who my wife knew very casually. She would send an email to Ava once or twice a year. Ava said, can you get on a plane, come down to Atlanta tomorrow? So she hopped on a plane, directed this episode of Queen Sugar. Ava sent her a month later to do another show. And then the phone started blowing up. So wow. She went from making very little money to now directing like Gilded Age and, much bigger shows. So now she's making 5 times, 6 times what I'm making. So she's the official breadwinner now, a provider now, which is great because that has taken a lot of pressure off of me. And so it makes my choices in my career easier. I could say no if I'm just not interested in that job. I don't have to stress about, oh shit, we need the money. We got to get the money. So now, I mean, I still got to get money, but it really has helped with me being able to prioritize jobs I want to do versus jobs I have to do, So that's been a blessing for sure.
Yeah, that's a beautiful thing, man. That's
Yeah.
my life. The last like 5 years has been kind of the opposite, with my wife moving here from China and just like, never having worked in America. English is her second language, and just having
Right.
to be like the breadwinner has been a lot of pressure. And then when I talk to my friends and just hear that from you, like my friends whose partners are like making, whatever career
Yeah.
wages, I'm like, oh man, that must be nice. But yeah, there's always, yeah, money has so much to do with everything in this industry. So
Yeah. Well, listen, Jon, thanks very much. I appreciate so we are variable.com, right?
yep.
And then the podcast, you've got a podcast, obviously on Apple or Spotify or whatever. Is that what's that called? Just variable podcast or
I think it's just variable.
variable? That's right. Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then how are the meetings struck? The LA, like if people are interested, I guess we should point out that there is a small membership fee to variable. I think was it 100? It's $100 a year. It's like
Yeah.
not much. And then do you need to be a member to go to the meetings? I'd assume, right?
Not the meetups. The
Not the
in-person
meetups.
meetups are for anybody. And then we have weekly events in the community, some with guests, some that members moderate, some that I moderate. And those are available to members. And they're kind of like, I don't really know how to, like, support group style, open conversations about topics that don't get spoken about very often on like set and stuff like that.
Right.
So yeah.
I saw one thing on the forum that was interesting to me. You were doing something where people, what did you call it? The idea was that if you had a personal project, you could get online. You sort of talk about what you want to accomplish, and then you turn off your phone or whatever, and you work on your stuff. I thought that was an interesting, kind of, I guess, accountability sort of procedure to get personal projects off the ground or continue working on personal projects.
Yep. Yeah.
Am I characterizing that right? Or
yeah, it's simple. It's just a small group of filmmakers that show up on Wednesdays at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So it's super early on the West Coast.
mm-hmm.
But yeah, show up, share a little bit about what you're working on, what you hope to get accomplished within the hour, and then you just kind of mute the video. Everyone does, and then you come back about an hour later and just share for a few minutes what you got done. And it's like a productivity engine of sorts. So yeah.
And how do people find out about when the meetups are happening in LA or New York? Is there a mailing list for that?
The easiest way to do is on if you follow us on Instagram. About halfway through the month, we post them on the grid, and then there's a link in the bio, and you can just click that, and you don't need to RSVP. You can just show up, and it's just a chill group of people. So yeah.
Do they happen at the same place, or it moves around?
In New York City, they're in the same place every month. It's this place called DSK, and I think it's in, I don't know, somewhere in Brooklyn.
Right.
And then the one in LA, there's a couple main venues just because LA is so traffic heavy and crazy. So I think there's one in Santa Monica and one in like the Arts District, I believe. So yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Jon. I appreciate it.
Yeah, Jon, it's been a pleasure, man. Thanks for reaching out.